Avoy das Beis Hamikdash Limkoima B'meira V'yameinu Amen Selah Hamikdash Limkoima B'meira V'yameinu.
Spectacular a cappella singing from Moshe Storch. That song is all about rebuilding the temple. May it happen soon in our days. Good evening, my holy brothers and sisters. How are you? Let us light up the darkness. Who is in the house with us this evening? Stephen Giger is first. He says shalom from Dover, New Hampshire. Yehuda Sobel says shalom from Florence, South Carolina. Leslie Ann Landsberg from Texas. Melissa Eitel Jurin, good evening from Great Neck, New York. Faye Foster from Chilliwack, Oregon. Did I pronounce that right? Sharon Frant Brooks, shalom and a Hodesh Tov from Lebanon, New Jersey. When night begins here in LA, we're going to be entering the month of Av. And on Rosh Chodesh Av, the first day of Av, we diminish our joy purposely. We diminish our joy. Harder for some than for others, I admit. But we diminish our joy for these 9 days as we head to Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of the Hebrew month of Av, when we commemorate the destruction of the temple. But we're not there yet. James Roth says shalom. Christo Cheney says greetings from Lubbock, Texas. Been looking forward to this all day. John Shore says Yehuda Chaim Shore is in the house from Sedona, Arizona. Leona Sue Thacker says hello, friends. Hello from a stormy southern Illinois. Donna Smith is with us from Bahama, North Carolina. Noman Hassan, it no like. I'm not sure what you're saying. Paula Schmidt-Klauser says shalom from Chicago. Sodfa Sophie says hello from Egypt. Welcome, Sodfa. So glad you're with us. Craven Garcia says shalom from Mexico. Bienvenido. Qué bueno que estás con nosotros. Carolyn Dobson Chavez says hello from Raleigh, North Carolina. Doc Wolf says evening from London. Sophie Catherine Lackow, or Latchow, I'm not sure how to say it, says Sophie from Baltimore, currently in Pennsylvania. Hadassah Amy O'Reilly says shalom from Canada. Vaughn Billow says shalom from Fremont, Ohio. Alice Gross from Baltimore saying, I did return and welcome back. And Chanel McDowell says shalom. Lynn is with us from Texas. Marjorie Holler from Georgia. Neil from Virginia. And Edith NYC says, what is the name of that song? I'm not sure what the exact name is. I wrote down Rebuild the Temple, but it's from Moshe Storch, and he sang it. You know, there's a young girl who was having her bat mitzvah during this period, you know, just wasn't able to have the party and the whole celebration she would have had otherwise, but her parents commissioned Moshe, who's such a talented musician, to sing several songs and teach them a little bit a cappella so that they could be done during the 3 weeks. All right, my friends, let's get right to it. This is a big and busy daf. We've spent several days Where are we? We're in page 137. That's Daf Kuf Lamed Zayin. We're in Tractate Shabbos, the second volume of the Talmud. And today, with God's help, we'll finish chapter 19. We've been on it for about a week. Chapter 19 is all about how the laws of circumcision intersect with the restrictions of Shabbos. So far, we spent about a week doing the first 3 Mishnas of chapter 19. Today, we're going to do 3 Mishnas in one day. They all occur on this page, Mishnas 4, 5, and 6 of this chapter 19. We have a lot to cover, some amazing teachings. Let's get right into it. Okay. And to set this up, I just wanted to read a little quote to you. This is from the Guide to the Talmud. This book was actually published the first time that the Steinsaltz translation and elucidation of the Talmud was published, I think like 30 years ago, before Koren redid it in the last few years. And so Rav Steinsaltz is sort of explaining how we approach the Torah. This is really an excellent guide. I highly recommend it. I don't even know if they're publishing this new right now, but it's easily found, used. So the Talmud Steinsaltz edition, Rav Steinsaltz says, the non-utilitarian nature of the Talmud also helps explain another of its characteristics, one that may initially deter the student considerably, and this is the Talmud dialectic. In other words, the method of learning Talmud. Yesterday, somebody asked, what is pilpul? Pilpul refers to this method that we learn, how we learn Torah through the Talmud, right, where we go in deep, and become so careful and precise, separating one idea from another, one holding from another, one ruling from another, one law from another, and always with such a fine tool where we separate one meaning from another. And some people will say, people who study the Talmud are crazy. They're just zeroing in on such abstract details, such minute details, that this is never going to come up in the real world. Why are you guys wasting your time? Says Rav Steinsaltz, this is exactly why we do it. We are in a pursuit of truth. That's what the Talmud is all about. We're learning how to find truth by practicing the search for and discovery of truth. Rav Steinsaltz continues, this dialectic, this method of learning Talmud is unique in taking nothing for granted. It is only satisfied with proofs that approach absolute certainty. It constantly tries to sharpen the proofs, cull the evidence, and reach the very essence of the problems with the maximum possible precision. This dialectic and the high level of exact distinctions it draws are not always appropriate to the practical requirements of everyday life. But where the purpose of the inquiry is truth for its own sake, one must use the most sensitive and acute instruments to analyze the issues, to verify the inferences, and to differentiate between cases, so as to arrive at a correct understanding of every matter. Thus, a proof that would normally be accepted as self-evident may be rejected in the Talmud because it contains some exceedingly subtle flaw in its argumentation. Only the most logical and convincing argumentation is accepted by the Talmud. And he goes on to explain why we not only try to figure out exactly what is being said in each sugya, in each passage, in each teaching of the Talmud, but also who is speaking. When a Mishna is not attributed, when a Gemara is not attributed, and we want to figure out, well, actually, who said that? It wasn't attributed, but maybe we can figure out who said it. Why does it matter who said it? And there's this understanding that we really need to understand who was speaking, because every earlier generation was closer to the ultimate source of truth in this world. Meaning, when the Torah was given at Mount Sinai, that was the moment of maximum truth in history. And as we get forward from that, as time passes, some of that truth is invariably lost. A little bit is lost in every generation. And that's why we rely on the wisdom of our elders and of our sages, and we want to know who said what. Now, laws may change over time, but the concept is that's because time changed, the world changed, right? Certain laws need to change because the world changed. But in terms of access to truth, it was greater in the past. Now, obviously, this doesn't apply to the scientific method where new data and new discoveries are added all the time. But when we're talking about what the law says, right, what God said to us to do when he told us how we should live and where wisdom lies and what our mission is in this world, so we actually had more access to that truth when further back in time, closer to the revelation at Mount Sinai. So finally, says Rav Steinsaltz, the goal least emphasized in the Talmud, in Talmudic inquiry, is that of reaching definitive halachic decisions. Even though the Talmud does contain the fundamental principles needed to clarify the halacha, the law that we live by, and it does occasionally contain a limited analysis of practical problems. Now, one reason I love the Koran Talmud so much is because it does tell you what the halacha is. When I was in my first time through the Talmud, I was doing it in the Art Scroll, which has more notes, more commentary, more secondary sources than the Koran does, which is wonderful when you're trying to figure things out and getting different points of view from other commentators. But when questions of law come up, that do come up in our everyday lives, and I always wonder, well, wait a minute, what is the law? It's not in the book. I would have to go somewhere else to look it up. It's nice that the Koran has it right there. Okay, so that's by way of introducing. Now we're going to go into one of these difficult analyses. It's like a real mind bender because we're going to see that we're going to have a question that seems to have two answers. Those two answers are brought by two sages. Later sages look back at the dispute between the earlier sages. The two earlier sages are going to be Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua, and they're going to disagree on a question. But then later sages, first later Tanaim, and then later Amoraim, so later in time, are going to disagree on what it is that Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua were disagreeing about. So we're going to really bring that fine-tooth comb to understand the argument. And if we can follow this argument, if we can get to the nitty-gritty of it and understand just what they're arguing about, our minds will be sharper and our understanding of these laws of both circumcision and Shabbos will be much sharper. We are going to benefit quite a bit if we can follow this. So let's do it. Okay. Here is the situation. This is Mishna 3 of chapter 19 in Tractate Shabbos. Two babies stand to be circumcised. They were born on consecutive days. Okay? Now, maybe they were twins and they were born one before sunset and one after. Okay? Because remember that day in the Hebrew calendar begins at sunset, not when the clock gets to midnight and the Gregorian calendar changes, but when night starts. And of course, there's some ambiguity about exactly when night begins, and we've talked about that can create a doubt, and actually that will come up in Mishnah number 5. But let's just say that there are two babies. They are born on consecutive days. Both are going to need to be circumcised. But if, for example, they were born on Tuesday and Wednesday, so then the following week, the Tuesday baby is going to get circumcised on Tuesday. That's 8 days later. And the Wednesday baby is going to get circumcised on Wednesday. That is simple enough. But in our case, these babies, one is born on Friday and one is born on Saturday, or one is born on Saturday and one is born on Sunday. And so there's going to be a Shabbos issue for one of those circumcisions. What makes this a challenge and an interesting question is that whoever it is that's responsible for circumcising the babies, and the parents too, they don't know which baby's which. They confuse the babies. Something goes wrong. And it's like the Tuesday baby is going to get circumcised on the following Wednesday, or the Wednesday baby is going to get circumcised on the following Tuesday. And now we have to figure out what this means. And did somebody commit a transgression for which they're going to have to bring a chatas, a sin offering. Let's get into it. All right. Mishnah number 4 of chapter 19. There are 2 babies. One was scheduled for a Shabbos circumcision, and the other one was scheduled for a Sunday circumcision. Okay, so they're both going to be circumcised on their 8th day. One of them is supposed to be, his 8th day is Shabbos, and the other baby, his 8th day is Sunday. Now, the one that should have been circumcised on Sunday instead mistakenly gets circumcised on Shabbos. This is now an 8th day circumcision. That baby is going to be circumcised on its 7th day and on Shabbos. In this situation, the one who performs the circumcision, according to the Mishnah, is liable to bring a sin offering. Why? Because he did not perform a mitzvah. You don't circumcise a child on its 7th day. It was a mistake to circumcise it on its 7th day. It was not obligated. Therefore, a 7th day circumcision does not override the restrictions of Shabbos. And therefore, the one who circumcised committed an unwitting transgression. He didn't do it on purpose. So he committed an unwitting transgression of Shabbos. And as we learned early on in our journey through Tractate Shabbos, for an unwitting transgression of a biblical law, right? It's a biblical law, one of the 39 categories of work prohibited on Shabbos, that we do not commit, that we do not create a wound, right? We don't wound something. That's a subcategory of slaughtering. Also, he draws blood. That's another subcategory. So he is going to be liable to bring a sin offering because he performed that 7th day circumcision on Shabbos when it was not obligated. He doesn't bring a sin offering. If the baby was supposed to be circumcised on Wednesday and instead he did the circumcision on Tuesday, so that's a mistake. But that you don't bring a sin offering for that. It's for violating Shabbos. So it's a 7th day circumcision on Shabbos. He's liable to bring a sin offering according to the Mishnah. Okay. The second case, there are 2 babies. One is scheduled to be circumcised on Friday. The other is scheduled to be circumcised on Shabbos. When the Erev Shabbos baby, the one who's scheduled to be circumcised on Friday, and they make a mistake and they circumcise him on Shabbos. So now the 8th day was Friday. Instead, it gets circumcised on its 9th day, which is Shabbos. In that case, Rabbi Eliezer says the circumcisor is liable to bring the sin offering. Why? Because as we know, a 9th day circumcision does not override Shabbos. So he shouldn't have done it. He did it. He did it unwittingly. So he's liable to bring the sin offering for unwittingly transgressing Shabbos. But Rabbi Yehoshua says he's exempt. He violated a rabbinic prohibition, but he didn't violate a Torah prohibition. Why is he exempt? Because he was focused on performing a mitzvah, and he did perform a mitzvah. It wasn't the correct mitzvah, but once the baby has reached its 8th day, thereafter, if it's not circumcised, it's definitely a mitzvah to circumcise it. It is not a mitzvah to circumcise a 7-day-old baby. It is a mitzvah to circumcise a 9-day-old baby. It should not have happened on Shabbos. It did. He made a mistake, but Rabbi Yehoshua says he's exempt from bringing the sin offering. That's the Mishnah. Now, the Gemara starts to amplify on this, right? So the Gemara is how later sages, the Amoraim, are going to read the Mishnah, and they're going to expand on it and see if we can sharpen our understanding of what the Mishnah says. In the Gemara, we're going to have a dispute between Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda. Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda are going to understand the dispute between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua differently from each other. First, Rav Huna. Rav Huna is going to bring his understanding in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. So Rav Huna, he is teaching in Babylonia later, right? So he's an Amora. It's sometime after the year 200. He's going to bring down Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, who's a Tana from before the year 200. and who might have even known Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua. I think he's a little later. I'm not sure if he was contemporaneous with them or not. Probably overlapped a little, but I didn't look it up. Okay, so Rav Huna says, in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, who says that Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua agree that a baby that's scheduled for a Sunday circumcision and gets circumcised on Shabbos, so this is so now it's a 7-day baby. It was scheduled, its 8th day was on Sunday, and it mistakenly gets circumcised on Shabbos when it's only 7 days old. According to Rav Huna, in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, that they say that Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua would agree in that case that the circumciser is liable. They would agree that their circumciser is liable. Why? Because that baby should not have been circumcised. It was its 7th day. There was no mitzvah being performed. It happened on Shabbos. There's nothing to exempt the guy. He has no leg to stand on, so he's going to be liable to bring the sin offering. Where do they disagree? They disagree on the baby that was scheduled to be circumcised on Friday. That was its 8th day. Instead, it was circumcised on Shabbos on its 9th day. In that case, Rabbi Eliezer would say he's liable. We don't circumcise on the 9th day. We don't circumcise a 9-day baby on Shabbos. And Rabbi Yehoshua would exempt. Now, what is the nature of this disagreement? This is basically what we said before as we were reading the Mishna, but where do they get it from? Rabbi Eliezer says he's liable because we derive the law of liability to bring a sin offering for an unwitting transgression of a Torah prohibition, which we've just taken as a given kind of throughout our journey through Tractate Shabbos. But where does it actually come from? So the Torah spells out that you will bring a sin offering for an unwitting violation of what? Of idolatry. It's spelled out with regard to idolatry, with regard to avodah zara, idolatry. That you'll find that in the book of Numbers, chapter 15, verses 22 through 31. That's where we get the law specifically stated in the Torah that if you transgress a Torah law, specifically idolatry, unwittingly, you're going to bring a sin offering for that. If you do it on purpose, you don't bring the sin offering. You don't have that opportunity to atone. It's a much more serious sin. The punishment is charis, excision. Your soul gets cut off. Maybe you die young. Although you will have an opportunity to make up for these sins with all the goodnesses that you do in your life and the serious teshuvah, the serious process of atonement that you engage in. But you don't get the opportunity to bring a sin offering. Of course, all of this presupposes that the temple is standing, so you could bring such a sin offering. Rabbi Yehoshua exempts in that situation. Why? How does he differ from Rabbi Eliezer? He says when you're looking in the Torah, then that you become liable to bring a sin offering for an unwitting violation of the prohibitions against idolatry. So what were you doing when you made that unwitting transgression? Whatever it was, you were not engaged in a mitzvah, right? You were misled. You didn't know it was an idol. You were tricked into bowing. Somehow you made a mistake, and the action that you performed can be construed as idolatry, so you weren't careful enough and you have to bring a sin offering, but you were not involved in performing a mitzvah, in fulfilling a positive obligation. That's the difference in this case of circumcision for Rabbi Yehoshua. He says this person wasn't just doing whatever and happened to commit idolatry. This person was working hard, organizing himself. He ended up making a mistake, but his goal was to perform a beautiful mitzvah, a great commandment, the commandment of circumcision, the commandment to bring a new Jewish baby boy into the covenant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This person has a protection against this particular transgression. He was trying to do something good. He ended up making a mistake. He didn't do what he was supposed to do, but he's not going to become liable to bring a sin offering. It's like he did something less bad than Rabbi Eliezer would say he did. So, So that's where they differ, and that's why Rabbi Yehoshua, in the case of the Friday baby that got circumcised on Shabbos, the man did commit a mitzvah, right? He did circumcise a child that stood to be circumcised. It should have happened on Friday, on its 8th day. Instead, it happened on its 9th day, which would not override Shabbos. He made a mistake, but at least the thing that he did was a mitzvah, right? The action that he performed is unlike, by mistake bowing to some object, and then it turns out that it was an idol. Here, he did perform the mitzvah of circumcision. It just turned out to be not due for that child. And that's why Rabbi Yehoshua exempts. Now, Rav Yehuda, who argues with Rav Huna, says, no, Rav Huna, you've got the debate, the dispute between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua. So says Rav Yehuda, let me explain to you what they actually disagreed on. And he's going to rely on Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Meir, one of the real great sages, he's a Tana also. When there's unattributed Mishnas, they're usually attributed to Rabbi Meir. He was a great sage, right? So Rav Yehuda says, this is how Rabbi Meir teaches the dispute between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua. Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua agree that the baby that was scheduled to be circumcised on Friday, its 8th day was on Friday, and instead it was circumcised on Shabbos. And so it was a 9-day baby. It was a 9th day circumcision that happened on Shabbos. According to Rav Yehuda, in the name of Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua would agree that this person, this circumciser, is exempt, right? He performed a mitzvah, he did it on the wrong day, but he's protected by the fact that he was performing a mitzvah. He's not liable to bring the sin offering. Where do they disagree? They disagree on the baby that was scheduled to be circumcised on Sunday. Its 8th day was Sunday, and instead it was circumcised on Saturday, on its 7th day. In that case, Rabbi Eliezer says he's liable. He performed a non-mitzvah. He circumcised a baby on its 7th day. He did that on Shabbos. He's liable to bring the sin offering. According to Rabbi Yehoshua, he's still exempt. Why is he exempt? Because he was focused on performing a mitzvah. He intended to perform a mitzvah. He would have performed a mitzvah if he could, even though it was not a mitzvah to circumcise that baby on its 7th day. That was his intent. He's protected. He's not liable to bring the sin offering. Let me just make sure. On the Sunday baby that was circumcised on Shabbos. Right. So Rabbi Yehoshua says exempt. Now we learn a third version. A third version of the dispute brought down by Rabbi Hiyya. He has another version based on a different teaching of Rabbi Meir. In this version, the Friday baby is circumcised on Shabbos. So the 8th day was Friday. It gets its circumcision on the 9th day, which is Shabbos. And according to Rabbi Hiyya, in the name of Rabbi Meir, both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua say, liable. This guy's liable to bring the sin offering. This was a mitzvah, right? It was a 9th day circumcision. So the baby needed to be circumcised. It shouldn't have happened on Shabbos. It did. Both are going to agree that he is liable. This sounds much more stringent of an opinion being attributed to Rabbi Yehoshua than we would expect. What's going on here? And with regard to the Sunday baby, its 8th day was on Sunday, and instead it gets circumcised on Shabbos on its 7th day. According to this version of the teaching, Rabbi Eliezer would say liable, of course, and Rabbi Yehoshua would say exempt. There's no underlying mitzvah here, but somehow he's going to be exempt. No mitzvah was performed. Why is he exempt? According to Rabbi Yehoshua, this case is different because in the first clause, the Shabbos baby was all... Remember, we've been talking about two babies. That's where the mistake comes from, because there were two babies and they were confused. Now we're going to deal with that other baby. So in the first half of this third version of the teaching, the Shabbos baby, the one that should have been circumcised on Shabbos, instead was circumcised on its 7th day on Friday. And now there is no baby that is supposed to be scheduled for Shabbos when the Friday baby, now going to be a 9th-day circumcision, happens. It's like Rabbi Yehoshua's understanding that, well, he was wrong, but he was relying on this mistake, but that mistake is no longer available. The baby that was supposed to be circumcised on Shabbos already got circumcised. It's not in the picture anymore. And so the mistake is fatal, and the guy has to bring he becomes liable to bring the sin offering. But in the case of the Sunday baby, and he's circumcised on Shabbos, there's still another baby that's going to be, right, the one that should have been circumcised on Shabbos is now going to be circumcised on Sunday. It's still around waiting for its circumcision. There's still a source of confusion that the guy who makes the mistake can rely on, and that's why Rabbi Yehoshua would exempt in that case. It's tough. Just hearing it is really not going to be good enough. I should have had a blackboard to explain it to you. If you're really curious about this, read it on the page and make a little chart as you write it out to help yourself understand it. I have one kind of in the margins of my book. But basically, the importance of the exercise that we just did is to understand, okay, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua disagreed on how the law would apply in this case of a guy making a mistake between two babies. And then the later generation disagreed on what exactly was the first generation disagreeing about. And they brought 3 different versions of what that disagreement was about. I can tell you, my friends, this comes up all the time in our lives. Being able to work your way through this kind of an analysis of a dispute is so important, because very often people who are in an adversarial position, whether they're arguing about politics or they're negotiating a deal, and they can really get to loggerheads. And often they're not really disagreeing. It's that they've gotten caught up in some of the terms of the disagreement. And if somebody could come along and really clarify, okay, exactly what is between us, what are we disagreeing about, and make that really clear, then very often the rancor can be removed from that situation. But it takes that clear-headed person who can parse the argument for what it really is. That's Mishnah number 4. Mishnah number 5, now that we've taken that journey through Mishnah number 4, much simpler. This one, an email goes around from My Jewish Learning, and he focused on this one as the puzzle. But really, this is much easier to understand. Mishnah number 5, although a child is generally circumcised at 8 days, as the verse states, on the 8th day it shall be circumcised, nevertheless, at times, the baby is circumcised at 9 days, or at 10 days, or at 11 days, or even at 12 days, but no later. This does not have to do anything with a mistake, and it doesn't have to do with a baby who is not healthy enough to be circumcised. This only has to do with how the calendar falls out, as we shall see. How so? In his usual manner, a child is circumcised at 8 days. If he was born at twilight, and it is therefore uncertain on which day he was born, then he is circumcised at 9 days, as his circumcision is postponed because of the uncertainty. And we don't want to circumcise early, right? Because early, we're not obligated to circumcise. The mitzvah is not being performed. If we're not sure which is the correct day, we're going to go late, because then for sure we're obligated to do the circumcision. So if it's unsure which day, because the baby was born at twilight, we would circumcise on the 9th day. But if the 9th day, but if he was born at twilight on Shabbos Eve, so he is not circumcised the following day, the 9th day, which would be Shabbos. Instead, we're going to wait till after Shabbos, which would be the 10th day. But if after Shabbos comes a festival, let's say, Shavuos falls on Sunday, so now we have to wait until Monday, and that's the 11th day. And if it's a 2-day festival, like Shavuos, or the first 2 days of Passover, or the first 2 days of Sukkot in the diaspora, or Rosh Hashanah in the diaspora, or in the land of Israel, a 2-day festival, then we would wait until the end of Shabbos and the 2-day festival, and then we would circumcise on the 12th day. That's all that we're saying there. The Mishnah adds that with regard to a sick child, one does not circumcise him until he becomes healthy. And the Gemara asks, well, once he becomes healthy, do we just do it on the next day? And actually, no. The sage Luda taught, Shmuel said that, let's say a baby had a high fever. Once the fever has left him, he's already well, we're going to wait an additional 7 days. Right? So once we've missed the 8th day anyway because the baby had a fever, now we're going to wait until for sure he's healthy and not take any chances. We're going to wait 7 days. Then the Gemara is going to ask, does this mean that we're going to wait 7 days, like the morning of the 7th day we can do it, even though he was born, let's say, in the late afternoon of the first day? Or are we going to count 7 24-hour periods? And the Gemara is going to rule we're going to go all the way, right? And have the least doubt possible with respect to the health of the child. So we're going to count 7 24-hour periods after the child is fully healthy and ready to be circumcised. We're just going to wait an additional 7 days to make sure that there's no possible danger to the child. That is Mishnah number 5. And now Mishnah number 6, which is going to complete our study of chapter 19, the laws of circumcision as they interact with the prohibitions and restrictions of Shabbos. Mishnah number 6 is all about, let's say that you perform the circumcision, but after it's performed, you look at the circumcision, and because it says a fleshy child, or because the circumciser, didn't cut off quite as much as he could have, so now we have a question: is the circumcision valid? Do we need to go back and cut some more? Now, as we already saw in terms of Shabbos, if indeed he has to go back and cut some more, we do that in order to make it a valid circumcision. And we can even do that if the thing started and this is happening on Shabbos. Right now, we're actually not talking about Shabbos. Right now, what we're talking about is, well, when do you need to go back and cut some more? And the basic answer is the child has to be circumcised and he should look circumcised, right? Sometimes, like, they cut off the full foreskin, but, it's a fleshy child, and just the way that the child looks, it kind of looks like he might not be circumcised, and then maybe that would cause him embarrassment at some time in the future. So we're going to make sure that he is circumcised and he looks circumcised. That's the basic rule. But now that we're on the subject of the circumcision itself, it is here in the Talmud, here on page 137 of Tractate Shabbos, that we learn the blessings which are said, which are spoken aloud at the bris milah, at the ceremony of the circumcision. It's very beautiful. I'm going to read it to you in terms of, imagine the ceremony if you haven't been to a bris milah. Imagine what's being said. Listen to what's being said here and how important the bris is in the Jewish tradition. And then finally, there's going to be a blessing here for what happens in ancient times when a Jew had a Canaanite slave, meaning a non-Jewish slave. Slavery did exist in biblical times, and a Jewish owner of a slave actually had an obligation to circumcise the slave. And so when we get to that, we're going to talk a little bit about the nature of slavery as it existed in ancient times and how it was actually an innovation in world history for the benefit of the slave. We'll get to that in a moment. So the sages taught in a Tosefta that one who circumcises a child recites, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has made us holy through his commandments and commanded us concerning circumcision." The father of the circumcised child recites, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has made us holy through his commandments and commanded us to bring him into the covenant of Abraham, our father. Those standing there recite, just as he has entered into the covenant, so may he enter into Torah, marriage, and good deeds. It's really very beautiful, right? When we welcome this boy into the covenant, we say, just as he has come into the covenant, so may he become into, a relationship with God through Torah. So may he come to marriage so that he can continue this tradition and have a son of his own. And may he be a mensch who does good deeds in his life. And the one who recites the additional blessing says, blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who made the beloved one holy from the womb, marked the decree in his flesh, and gave his descendants the seal and the sign of the holy covenant. Therefore, as a reward for this, the living God, our portion, commanded to deliver the beloved of our flesh from destruction for the sake of his covenant that he set in our flesh. Blessed are you, Lord, who establishes the covenant. As you can imagine, it's a time of great joy, but it's a time of great holiness, of great sacredness. It really is special what's happening there. One who circumcises converts says, blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who made us holy with his commandments and commanded us concerning the circumcision. And the one who recites the additional blessing recites, blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has made us holy with his commandments and commanded us to circumcise converts and to drip from them covenantal blood, if they've already been circumcised, as were it not for the blood of the covenant, the heaven and earth would not be sustained, as it is stated. This is from Jeremiah 33:25. If my covenant would not be with day and night, the ordinances of heaven and earth I would not have placed, which is interpreted to mean that were it not for the covenant of circumcision that is manifest both day and night, the world would cease to exist. He concludes the blessing with the phrase, blessed are you, Lord, who establishes the covenant. And finally, and I'm going to talk a little bit about slavery in the ancient world, and then I'm going to get to your comments and questions. When a Jew buys a Canaanite slave, he is obligated to circumcise the slave, as the slave is partially entering the covenant of the Jewish people. One who circumcises slaves recites a blessing similar to those mentioned above, who made us holy with his commandments and commanded us, blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who made us holy with his commandments and commanded us to circumcise slaves and to drip from them covenantal blood, as were it not for the blood of the covenant, the heaven and earth would not be sustained, as it is stated. And then it restates that verse from Jeremiah. Now, it's important to understand, to our modern ear, there's just nothing worse than imagining slavery, right? Thank God the world has moved past slavery, although that's not even true. Tragically, there are pockets in the world where slavery still exists, and we should fight that with all our heart. Back in the ancient world, it was as common as could be. Slavery was everywhere, throughout the world, in every culture, in every land, everywhere. When the Torah was given, slaves who previously had zero rights, some say that the Code of Hammurabi had something to do with it, but whatever the rights of a slave were, they were not respected. Along comes the Torah and the Jewish people, and now the slave owner has a sacred obligation to respect certain rights of the slave. Biblical slavery, and so we really have to understand how, let me just say, so biblical slavery now, as it was given by the Torah, is just different than slavery had been, and it would remain different than what slavery continued to be elsewhere in the world. When you think about what the Atlantic slave trade was, meaning slavery in America in the Caribbean, in Central and South America. It's just an unimaginable horror. From the very first moment, when they were captured in Africa, when they were loaded into the ships, so many died under the horrific, unimaginable conditions of the Atlantic Passage. And then, it just remained that bad and that awful in the New World. Nina and I made a film called Saving Lincoln about Abraham Lincoln. So we know a little bit from Abraham Lincoln's point of view of what slavery was in America and what the Civil War was all about, which is basically slavery. Obviously, there was much more to it than that. But what I want to mention here is that Abraham Lincoln, over the course of the Civil War, when it fell to him, such a gentle and kind man, to send so many boys to die in that war. And he was very conscious that he was the president of America, right? And he wanted the South to remain part of America. That's also what the war was all about. 700,000 boys died in a country that had a little over 30 million people in it. Today we have 300 million people in America, so that's as if 7 million people died in a war today, is what the equivalent would be. Amidst that much horror and bloodshed, Abraham Lincoln came to believe that the Civil War was a punishment, a collective punishment on all of America for the collective sin of slavery. It was not just a punishment to the South where slavery was legal. It was a punishment of all of America, because the fact is, all of America had benefited from the slave trade in the South. The wealth of America in terms of cotton, tobacco, etc., benefited all of America. Everybody benefited from that. And he viewed that the Civil War and the horrors of the Civil War were a punishment, a divine punishment from God for that collective sin. That was Abraham Lincoln's understanding of it. Biblical slavery was not like our understanding of slavery in America. For biblical slavery, first of all, for Jewish slaves, there were Jewish slaves, right? A Jewish slave would end up enslaved because he committed a crime, or more likely because he got into debt that he couldn't get himself out of. And he would sell himself into slavery to pay off his debt. But when a Jew was a slave, it would have a finite amount of time. He would have to be freed, I think, after 6 years. But when a non-Jew became a slave, so this was different. This was understood basically to be spoils of war. And that was very common in the ancient world. Two peoples go to war, one loses. The ones who lose, many of them get taken into slavery. It's just all throughout the ancient world. What the Torah came to say is that when you take that slave in war, you're going to have obligations to that slave. One we just read, you're going to have to circumcise. Now, we just said that circumcision that we perform on ourselves, we understand to be like the greatest gift that we enter into the covenant with God. So if a slave gets circumcised, it's not a punishment. Right? It's like we're welcoming into our people. And not only that, but a Canaanite slave has the opportunity to become a Jew. Conditions, that some specific things have to happen, but a Canaanite slave can become a Jew. That is possible. Even if he doesn't, in which case he couldn't remain a slave forever. He would eventually become free. Moreover, a Canaanite, a non-Jewish slave, had rights to own property, could even purchase some of himself, eventually purchase his freedom. They could learn, they could eat. A slave in the priest's household could eat teruma, which was holy food that even, a Levite or an Israelite could not eat. So there was just a very different understanding of what slavery was. And here we're learning some of that understanding from the law of circumcision as it was applied to slaves and was given. It's not a rabbinic decree that exists in the Torah. So God changed the status of slaves in the world. Over time, it changed much more. I mean, Jewish ownership of slaves it existed, but by the late Second Temple period, it was small. It was minor. And while there were Jewish slave owners throughout, the 2,000 years since the late Second Temple period, Jews just never participated that much in it. Of course, you can bring examples. Yes, there were Jewish slave traders, there were Jewish slave owners, they existed. But it was always a small, small number among the Jewish people, really attributable to the fact that we're not monolithic in any way. Jews are very diverse. In every age, there's many Jews that really have nothing to do with Judaism. Has always been the case. They're not living a Jewish life very much. But Jews just really were not much part of slavery post-biblical times, okay? And one of the reasons for that is because once Catholicism got going in Europe, the Pope and popes, right, did not want Jews to own Christians as slaves, and so they prohibited it. It was people could own slaves, people could own Christian slaves, but not Jews. Why? Because Jews circumcise their slaves and try to bring them into the covenant. We don't proselytize, but if somebody's living in our home, then we're going to extend the benefit of our relationship with God to them. And the Christian rulers didn't want Jews doing that with Christian slaves. And that's just another reason why Jews were just never really involved in slavery and slave ownership. Many exceptions, but as a rule, the majority in every era were not really involved in slavery. And that's what I've got to say for today. Let me look at your questions and comments. Ooh, there seems to be a lot. Okay, Lynn says, may this Av truly be a new start for all of us on our path, and she wishes success to you all. Thank you, Lynn. Lynn also says, I read the Essential Talmud by Steinsaltz, paperback, before allowing myself to read the Mishna and Talmud sections. He sets things straight for how to proceed as a novice. It's a fantastic preparation. So that's the Essential Talmud by Rav Steinsaltz. Adin, A-D-I-N, Steinsaltz, like Stein Saltz is how that would be spelled. Sharon Frant Brooks, why aren't the parents liable for incorrectly informing the moil? You can tell I had daughters. This is one of those cases, I mean, really, did it ever happen that babies were confused and the wrong child was circumcised on the wrong day? Perhaps. I mean, who knows what's happened in the history. Maybe it happened at an orphanage. Who knows where it happened. But this is definitely one of those cases, let me just get a drink of water, very unlikely to happen in the real world. But as we've explained, we study it because we want to get at that underlying principle. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shach kol nihi v'divrah. Alice Gross. What if some reason they don't know who was born when? You're saying like they don't even know which is its 8th day. So then I think what they would do, they're certainly not going to override Shabbos because they don't know when its 8th day is. So from whenever they got the baby, they're not sure if it was born yesterday, the day before that, but from whenever the baby came before them, they count 8 days from there. So then for sure, they've waited the right amount of time. I would think that's what they would do. Neil. Is the confusion that the father is having with the correct day for the Brit Milah due to the ambiguity of the birth time being at twilight rather than the father not being able to count? That's one of the reasons why it would come up. Exactly. And Neil also says, I think I figured out that with the first Mishnah, it was simply a forgetful father, and the second Mishnah is on the twilight issue. Very good. Caroline Dobson Chavez says, how could a female enter into the covenant? Answer, you're in. A female doesn't need to be perfected, right? The male, now again, like in the same way that when we bring a sin offering, it's an opportunity. We don't have to think about, oh man, I suck, I'm so bad, now I have to bring a sin offering. It's more, I'm human, I committed a mistake, and now I get to bring that sin offering. Of course, that's available to everybody. In terms of the circumcision, the man needs the circumcision in order to be perfected, right? In order to be complete. The female is born complete. She doesn't need to enter the covenant. She's in the covenant as soon as she's born, if she's a Jew, right? And that's easy because that's why it's a maternal lineage, right? That's why the halacha is the one born of a Jewish mother. So if the female's born of a Jewish mother, she's Jewish. If she's not born of a Jewish mother, halachically, she becomes Jewish when she goes through a conversion. She goes through that conversion process. She learns everything she needs to know in order to follow the laws, and then she immerses in the mikvah, just like a man would immerse in the mikvah for conversion. And that is a commanded immersion. Where was I? Wait, I missed one. Did I miss one? Bill Aldrich. Got to say two versions in, and I generally think Rabbi Yehoshua was a little closer to right. So Rabbi Yehoshua in this case is pursuing equity a little bit more, and Rabbi Eliezer seems to be a little bit more stringent in the letter of the law. But remember, that's in this case, right? So very often when we have two sages opposed to each other, one is stringent, one is lenient, their positions in terms of stringency and leniency may be reversed in another case because it really depends on their understanding of the source law, right? And that's why you have to always be careful, right? In tough cases, make bad law because it's the way that they're applying the law. They're always seeking truth. And if they apply the law in this way, produces a stringency, in another case might produce a leniency and vice versa. Okay. And Mark Price. Some very courageous treatment of gulp, highly embarrassing and compromising historical facts here. Cutting any bits off slaves should never sound good. I honestly admire the fact that you don't duck out of the hard explanatory work here. I respectfully disagree with some of what you say, but I admire the clarity and dexterity of your thinking. And really, that's what it's all about, right? I mean, I'm not a sage. We're not sages. We're not at the level of the sages. As we've said, they were much closer to the revelation than we are, and I'm not even a rabbi. But the more we dig in and try to understand what is being taught, why the law, not so much why the laws were given, but what laws were given and what the implication was of those laws, the better we're going to understand our relationship with each other, with God. And as I always say, we don't have souls, we are souls. We're here for a reason, we have a mission. The more we understand, the nature of Torah, the nature of God and God's relationship with people, the more able we're going to be to identify our individual unique missions and fulfill them. That is what I have got for us today. Let me just double check. Yes, that's what I've got for us today. Great to have you with us. This was challenging. It was not easy. But tomorrow we're going into a whole new subject. With God's help, we'll be starting chapter 20, the Tractate Shabbos, on page 138. And we're going to get away from these bodily issues that are so delicate and difficult to grapple with. And we're going to get back to some issues of food preparation and construction, laws we haven't studied yet, but that are a little bit more similar in that sense to laws that we've studied before this challenging chapter. That's what I've got for us today. Wishing you Godspeed. And may this Av, which is going to come in tonight with a little bit of pain in these next 9 days, we're going to remember with sadness the temple was destroyed. But once we get past Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, then we're on a real, soaring takeoff as we head toward Elul, the month of Elul, when we prepare for the new year of Rosh Hashanah. That's where we are. All the best, my holy sisters.